welcome to the second part of the 5/2 tutorial. This time we're going to look at the chord melody. Chord melody simply means that we are going to play the chords and the melody at the same time on the same ukulele. If you're completely new to this topic, James Hill released a wonderful little introduction video to chord melody, so I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below, and feel free to check that out. It's a really nice video. I'd say we jump right into it. Just as I said in the first video, please remember to give yourself time and don't be frustrated if something doesn't work immediately. That is perfectly normal. So in order to play the chord melody arrangement for 5/2, we're going to have to play a lot of the chords in second or third position. That means that we're going to leave the comfort of the first 3 frets and we are going to explore a little bit more of the fingerboard. It is really useful to have a little bit of background knowledge, how and why the chords in higher positions work. So let's just have a quick look at that. If you play a string on the ukulele, for example on the A string, and you place a finger in the first fret, the tone that you hear is raised by 1 half tone. So the A now turned into an A sharp or a B flat. That's the same note. If you put a finger 1 fret higher in the second fret, our note now has changed into a B. And even 1 higher into the third fret, we got a C. The same principle applies to chords where all the strings are covered. So for example, take a B flat. All the strings are covered here. So if I move the whole chord as it is 1 fret higher, all of the strings are now raised a half tone. So the whole chord is raised by 1 half step. So instead of a B flat, we are now hearing a B, and 1 higher, we would have a C chord. That means that this is the exact same chord as this. We are hearing the same notes, they're just a little bit differently distributed. So that simply means if this would be our first position of a C, this would be our second position of C. It is really good to just keep that principle in mind a little bit to understand what we are doing throughout the video. Playing chords in higher positions can really help to make the song more exciting. You suddenly have this whole palette of sound colors that you can use, and it just gives you so much more freedom to play with a song. So suddenly songs that maybe only have 2, 3 or 4 chords can really bloom when you mix up the different positions of the chords. So let's have a look at the chord progression of the 5/2 chorus. The progression is going to be exactly the same, but we're going to move lots of the chords into higher positions. So let's just have a look through the progression chord by chord. The first F and the first A7 stay exactly as they were before. The D7, which we before played as a bar chord, we're now playing in the simplified version with the index finger and the middle finger. That is very important. Please don't use your middle finger or ring finger. We're going to need our index finger and our middle finger. It will be very clear later when we add the melody why we have to use these fingers here. The G7, instead of playing it in first position, we're going to move it all the way up here. For this one, you place your index finger in the 5th fret on the C string, your middle finger also in the 5th fret on the A string, and your ring finger in the 7th fret on the E string. So it would be 0, 5, 7, 5. Sounds like this. Make sure that your wrist is turned a little bit into this direction so that these 2 fingers have enough space on the fretboard. If your wrist is turned too much into this direction so that the fingernails are mainly pointing at your face, it might get a little bit uncomfortable for these 2 fingers here. Let's have a quick look on how we can change most comfortably from the D7 to the G7 up here. The index finger and middle finger are already in the perfect position. We want them to stay just like this. So we can move them as they are to the 5th fret. Of course, they have to change strings, but the position stays exactly the same. So just try this movement a couple of times. And remember, when you're changing, take the thumb with you. Don't leave it up there. Take it with you so that it always is more or less parallel to the other fingers. So once the chord change feels a little bit more comfortable, try adding the ring finger as well, and just do this change slowly and try a couple of times because that's really going to help you out later. The C7, instead of playing it nice and easy up here, we're going to play it in the 3rd fret as a bar chord. For that, you place your index finger over the entire 3rd fret and the middle finger goes on the C string in the 4th fret. Sounds like this. Let's just very quickly have a look why this is a C7. If you think about it, it's kind of like an A7. that has been moved up. If we have the A7 there and we just move the one finger up one fret, the strings that were empty are still sounding the same, but they also need to be raised a half note. In order to do that, we can just simply place a bar with our finger over the entire first fret, and then we can move the chord around freely as we wish. So the A7, move everything up half a step, we would get a B flat 7. You probably also know this chord. If we move it up another fret, we would get a B7 and one more, and we get a C7, just so it makes sense why this is a C7 right here. Then we have the turnaround, and the turnaround stays exactly as it was before. So we got the F, the diminished, the G minus 7, and the C plus. This turnaround might have felt like the most difficult part of the first video, but in the second video, this is gonna be the little part of the song where we get to relax and where we get to just hang out in the first 3 frets of the fingerboard. The chord progression then gets repeated, just like we learned it now, up until just before the turnaround. So up to the C7, everything stays the same, but then instead of going into the turnaround, we go to the F like we do in the normal chord progression. But instead of playing the F here, we're gonna play it up here. So place your index finger over the entire 5th fret, and then the pinky, the little finger, goes into the 8th fret on the A string. Sounds like this. If you think about it, it's kind of like a moved up C. And if you want to, you can just do the thing we did before, start with a C, move it up 1 fret at a time, and you'll see that you end up with an F all the way up here. In the chord progression we learned in the first video, we would just stay on the F there, but we're gonna add a little extra chord change. We're gonna go from the F to this one here, which would be a B flat. For this one, the index finger stays as a bar over the entire 5th fret, and then middle finger and ring finger form an F structure up here. So it is kind of like a moved up F. If you find this whole moving chords up the frets too theoretical, feel free to just kick that out of the window. You don't need that information, but I find it incredibly interesting, and I think it's always nice to understand a little bit more of what we are doing here. We only stay here very shortly, and we're gonna move directly back to the F. Later it's gonna sound something like this. So it would be down, down, up, change to B flat, down, down, up, and then a single downstroke on the F again. So it would be down, down, up, down, down, up, down. Okay, we're gonna stop right here and leave the middle section of the chorus for later. We're gonna just play through the chord progression we learned up to this point, and then I'll also immediately show you the chord melody for this section, and then we're gonna do the middle separately. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four. Okay, so let's have a look at the actual chord melody. We will be playing full chords, but we still want the listener to hear a distinct melody. And there are 2 principles we have to keep in mind to make that possible. One is that our ears are hardwired to listen for the highest sounding note in a chord, and the other one is that the last note that we hear is gonna stick most prominently in our head. So keeping these two things in mind is absolutely crucial for developing a successful chord melody arrangement. We are pretty lucky because the melody line of 5/2 is almost exclusively happening on the A string, which makes it really easy to make the melody note the highest sounding one in the chord. And it is also the last note that we hear every single time we have a down strum. Now, before we get into strumming the whole thing, let's just locate where our melody is. As I said, we almost always have the melody on the A string. So when you play an F, the melody is gonna be like this. I can just strum down the chord, and the first melody note is the empty A string. Then you can place your little finger in the 3rd fret and remove it again. So it is. We move on to the A7. I'm gonna do the same thing there, but instead of placing the little finger in the 3rd fret, we're gonna place it in the 4th fret. Then we move to the D7, and we're almost going to do the same here. This time the little finger is going to go in the 5th fret, and we're adding some extra notes. Okay, up to that point it would sound something like this. Now keep your hand in this position. The little finger is just done tapping the 5th fret, and we're going to move the whole thing to the G7 up here, and the little finger, which is already stretched out, immediately goes into the 8th fret. So from here, leave the little finger stretched out and move it all the way up there, because we now have the melody note here. Then we remove the little finger, put it back into the 8th fret, and remove it again. So we have. Okay, then we go to the C7 in the 3rd fret. We have our melody note already here on the A string without doing anything extra. Then we place our ring finger in the 5th fret next. So that's all we do there, we just do. And then we go into the turnaround. We don't have to do anything there. As I said before, time to relax. So the section from the G7 would sound something like this. Then it all gets repeated. So we have the F in the 3rd fret, the A7 in the 4th fret, and the D7 in the 5th. Move everything up to the G7, C7, and now instead of going to the turnaround, we go into the little ending, to the F, B flat and F. There we also don't do anything else. Once the chord progression feels more comfortable, and once you know where to find all the melody tones, we can then look at the strumming. On the F, it would sound something like this. So for the 2nd strum only, I place my little finger and then I take it away again. So I do down, down, up, down, up. In order to really make the melody appear, make sure that you're always hitting the A string. It is not so important right now to always perfectly hit the top strings. So really focus on hitting the A string, both on the downstrokes and on the upstrokes. So you have a very popping melody line. On the A7 we have the same thing again. So it would be like this. Down, down, up, down, up. On the D7 it would be like this. Down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Let's do it very, very slowly together up until this point. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, next we have the G7. There we are gonna simplify our strum a little bit and we're just gonna play down, down, up, down, down, up, and it's gonna look like this. Next we have the C7 and we're gonna stick with the simplified strum there, and we have one time down, down, up just with a normal C7, and then one time with our melody note here. So it's simply. Then once again we can relax with a turnaround. And as you know by now, everything then gets repeated up until the point just before the turnaround, and then we go into the little ending that you also already know. That was this one here with a down, down, up, down, down, up, down. Alright, so all of this really is a lot to take in. I know it craves a ton of concentration in the beginning, so take breaks and don't stress yourself. One more thing I want to mention before we go into the play along is that especially if you're an advanced player, you really don't have to bother so much where exactly the melody tones are on which strum and everything. As I said in the first video, we are quite free when we are singing to move around the rhythm and the melody, and the same applies to the chord melody, of course. It is good to know in the beginning to have some form of orientation what you are doing, but as I said, especially if you're advanced, feel free to move that around to whatever you feel like. Okay, so let's play through everything we learned so far, and then we can start looking at the bridge. Just a heads up, the big chunk is already done. There's not so much left to learn. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, three, four.
It isn't her, but could she